And we're up and running. Well, hi, everyone. Last week's class. By the way, I've got to turn the grades in March, I believe, is it 17th? Which one, whatever Friday is a week. I think 17th or 19th. So we'll talk more about that at the end of the class. Tonight's topic is motivation. And let's see if I can bring it up here. It's one of my favorite topics to cover. And I kind of have put it last because I think there's a little bit of a link between motivation and kind of where you're sitting in life, where you are in your jobs, and all kinds of stuff. And I have a little segment at the end I'll talk about on happiness, which I think there's a high correlation between different kinds of motivation and satisfaction and life happiness. And many of you talk about when you were writing your mission papers, would talk about part of your mission and vision. The word happiness comes up. Heck, it's one of the main words in our Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So happiness is a big word for all of us. So I thought I'd throw a few thoughts on happiness. Motivation, and I think you can, you're going to be called on to create motivating environments. It's also important to think about in terms of your own motivation. And to me, there's a lot to this. So I'm going to spend some time on it. I think I've talked to you before about, why do we study these kind of topics? And I think what most organizations want from people who work for organizations is performance and commitment. You notice I used the word commitment, not loyalty. Performance and commitment. That, if most organizations could get this, they would be highly effective. But getting this out of a workforce is getting these kind of things out of a workforce is much more complicated than it seems. But performance and commitment are two big things. You wouldn't even need to supervise people if you could be assured of these. And so performance is related to motivation, and it's simply put. And for you to perform presupposes you have the ability to do it, and then the environment allows you to perform. So if you have a combination of ability and situation you're in, it impacts your motivation to perform. And that's what I want to unpack a little bit tonight. And I'm going to talk about the book. The book does not talk about theories, but I'm going to talk about four big theories that I think you can think about motivation. Actually, there are four theories that everything that's talked about in the textbook relate to. But if you're looking at performance in an organization, you can ask a few questions. How difficult are the tasks we're asking people to do? How capable is the person? And how hard is the individual trying to do the work? In other words, is there an attitude problem? And too often we don't sit back and ask these questions. A lot of times, if people keep failing at a certain job, the question might be what we're asking people to do in a job is not appropriate. So if you have someone that you're working with or someone you're supervising, and you're not happy with performance, I ask everyone, and my one piece of advice is, do you have an ability problem or an attitude problem? And depending on your answer to that question, uh, really determines how you're going to proceed. If you believe you have an attitude problem with an employee, you're going to proceed in a very different way than if you believe there's an ability problem. So the word motivation comes from meaning to move, uh, and we're talking about moving in a certain direction with a certain intensity and a certain persistence. In other words, when you work to get something done, if I ask you to do something and you do it, well, the doing of it, well, first of all, if you move in the direction of doing what I ask you to do, that's one thing. But how much effort are you going to put into it? That talks about the intensity with which you're going to do something. And then how long are you going to stay at it? And that's what we talk about with motivation. And you can think of motivation as performance, and you're looking to get certain outcomes out of performing, and then you get satisfaction, which then spurs on motivation. So this is kind of an outline to look at, an equation to think about with motivation. And then we say performance is the product of ability multiplied by your motivation. And your ability is your aptitude, training, resources, and motivation has to do with desire and commitment. So that's kind of a general way of thinking about motivation. And um, I'm going to present one way to think about this, and this is called expectancy theory, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Uh, and when we talk about uh, effort, are you going to put effort into performance? And what effort has to do with, me asking you to do something. Are you going to move intent? How intense are you going to be, and how persistent? One of the issues you have is, you ask yourself is, can I do what I'm being asked to do? Do I have the ability? And so this is where self-esteem and self-efficacy come into play in motivation. If I ask you to maybe write me a haiku poem right now, and if you're an expert at writing haiku poetry, you might jump in there and do it real quickly. But if you don't know much about it, you might not be too motivated to try and do it if you've never done it before. So there's a real element of our self-confidence when it comes to efficacy, and so basically we ask ourselves this question: if I put effort out, will I be able to perform? And if I perform, will I receive outcomes? And will the outcomes be satisfying for me? Now, I think this is a theory that explains a lot of motivation. That let me unpack it a little bit. Here's what self-efficacy is about. My self-confidence? Well, I look at my past accomplishments. I look at other people. I say, hey, if Mike can do it, I should be able to do it. A lot of times we verbally persuade people. Think of coaches in the locker room. We tap into emotions, and so our self-efficacy is based on, can I believe I can perform, and then does the environment allow it to happen? And so then some of the outcomes that we get, and then this is where you kind of get into Maslow's stuff. Do we get these kind of outcomes if I perform? Food, relatedness, control, self-esteem, self-actualization. or do I get the outcomes, both internal, extrinsic, and intrinsic? And then how much do I value these outcomes? Do I get the money, the pay, the accomplishment, esteem? So let me just go back before I pose this question to you. Basically, what I'm saying is your motivation is determined by your belief in your abilities. That if you work hard to get something done, you realize you're going to get certain outcomes, and you believe that those outcomes are going to be valuable for you. And so I'm going to throw a situation out to you. And let's say I offered you $1,500 to help me with a project this Saturday morning, and you're free. I'm going to give you $1,500, come to my house from 9 until noon. And you have the ability to do it. Do you think you would be motivated in chat? Why don't you just type in chat for everyone to see? Would you be motivated to do that? Click yes or no, and then click a number from 0 to 10 on how hard do you think you would work for me. So in the chat window, and you can type it for everyone to see, type whether you would be motivated to work, and then secondly, your level of intensity. All right. All right, so that's up there. You all think you'd be motivated. I mean, you all have the ability. All right. And this is kind of in that model of that I just put up there. The expectancy theory, it's what you expect to get out from doing something. So you have the self-esteem that says that you can get the job done. This outcome of $1,500 looks pretty good. And your intensity level for working is depending on how valuable that outcome is, might determine the number. Now, if you were Bill Gates, you might answer no, or if you answered yes, you might put a 1 on there. Now, what I'm going to do then is put up a second scenario for you. You just discovered that I offered $2,000 to other members in your class to do the same thing. Now, based on this new information, how might this impact your effort on a scale of 0 to 10? All right. So you're still going to be motivated to do it because you agreed. But what about this new information that half the people there will be getting 2,000 and you 1,500? What will that do to your effort number? All right. So okay. So for most of you, it's going to drop. What I presented to you, which I think is a very reasonable way to look at motivation, and it doesn't explain everything. That theory I just gave you. Taryn put an interesting comment up there. Maybe you'll give us a chat on it when I'm done with this. this doesn't explain what the expectancy theory doesn't explain everything when it comes to motivation. There's another theory I like to think about called equity theory. And I really think this theory is true for all of us. We are all looking at basic fairness when we look at compensation, and we all want to be treated fairly. So our sense of how we're being treated has something to do with our motivation. So basically, you get outcomes and you have certain inputs to get those outcomes. And what we all do is we compare ourselves to other people, and we look at other people's efforts they put in and their outcomes. And if we feel we're fairly treated, we're in a state of equilibrium. Maybe just jump in and mention to me, what would happen if you felt that you're out of whack with other people, that you're getting less than other people for the same effort and outcomes? What might you do?
I'd be demotivated.
And what might you do about that?
Maybe try and look for another job.
Okay, that might be it. What else might you do? Mike?
Call in sick that morning.
You going sick?
Maybe.
Might work less.
Yeah.
Okay. So you might say, okay, I'm going to bring myself, okay, I'm going to put less effort in.
Yeah.
You might go to your boss for a raise. You might rationalize it in your head and you say, well, maybe they deserve more. Basically, what you're trying to do is bring yourself into a state of equilibrium. What this model says, it's the equity theory, which says that we want to be in a state of equilibrium when it comes to this fairness. What do you think you might do if you feel like you're getting more than other people? What if it's out of balance the other way? What might you do? Anything?
I would probably work just as hard.
So you might work a little harder, or if
Mhm.
the guilt might come in.
Yeah.
Basically, these are some of the outcomes and inputs we think of when we talk about equity theory of pay, benefits. They can be intrinsic or extrinsic. And some of the things we look at are effort, performance, our education, training, all of that. So that's equity. Then a third theory I think it's good to look at. Well, before I move on, Taryn, you mentioned, by the way, I learned a similar concept in microeconomics. Do you want to chat about that?
Sure. I apologize for being off camera. I'm a little under the weather today, but the concept basically states that in terms of the marketplace and attracting consumers, that we make our decisions like based on the information that we have. But if another piece of that information is presented later, that could impact our decision. So a similar example was given. The professor basically said, like, if I guaranteed you a B+ in this class and you didn't have to do anything else and you knew you were going to get a B+, would you take it? More than likely, yes. But now what if you find out that I offered other students a similar deal, but their grade is an A? How do you feel about that now? So it's like the context of how information is presented influences the decisions that we make. Was kind of like the basic part of that. And it was about, like, brands and how they market to consumers. But when you gave that example and presented that concept, I was like, oh, this sounds familiar.
That's cool. Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, you're right. I mean, I think that this concept of equity is very powerful. The concept of fairness is very, very powerful in a lot of this. I think a third way to think about being motivated, any of you athletes who are workout, goal setting is very powerful, a very powerful one. We set specific and we are motivated by goals we set for ourselves. And a lot of the goals are, just quickly on this, very specific and goals that others give to us aren't quite as powerful as the ones we set for ourselves. That's why the literature talks about leaders should allow people to share in setting their goals. And if the goal is self-set, it does have an impact on the intensity of our work, the persistence of our work, and different ways creative ways we'll think about getting the work done. So whenever you're setting goals, how many of you where you work, do they set goals for you? They're pretty much every workplace I know has certain goals they look for. Way back when and during my MBA days, as you know, my MBA is obsolete. Let me just stop for a minute and share on that. Back in my MBA days, there was a big theory going around called MBO. And has anyone ever heard of MBO out there? It's called management by objectives. And that was in all the press, and there was books and bestsellers. Basically, the idea was it should start at the top with strategic planning. You set goals and objectives, and everyone down through the organization sets goals and objectives that are in alignment with the different levels of the organization. And if everyone does that, then your organization will be perfect. Well, the big buzzword MBO isn't around anywhere, but everyone I know, any organization I know of, tends to ask people to set goals, tends to ask people to set individual goals for your department, for your division, whatever, financial goals, marketing goals. These are all have to do a lot with that MBO kind of thinking. Management by objectives. In other words, that goal setting is a very, very powerful goal setting is a very powerful motivator. So so basically you think about strategies around rewarding achievement of goals and pay or publicity or support. So goal setting becomes a major, and goal setting, especially if you help set your own goals, you're going to work harder to do it. So when you're doing team and teamwork and you set team goals that everyone buys into, your chances of achieving them are go up because your team's going to be motivated. And the more difficult goals are difficult goals lead to intensity and persistence. Impossible goals are demotivators. So you got to watch that in goal setting, that they're not too easy. So the level of performance you get, there's that sweet spot on difficulty of goals. More difficult goals lead to higher performance than easier goals. More specific goals lead to higher effort than vague goals, and goals must be accepted. Goals have to be accepted to have an effect on effort. So I need to buy into it. And then this notion, I think you probably have seen it in the textbook. I really like it. SMART goals. I really think this is a good structure to apply to your goal setting. Are your goals specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and do you put a time frame on them? You know, for my youth, President Kennedy set one of the most famous SMART goals ever. He said, "We will put a man on the moon within this decade and return him safely to Earth." Now, he said that in 1962, I believe, and we put a man on the moon in 1969. And he put this goal out there when we hadn't even successfully launched a rocket yet into space. And if you look at that, there's a SMART goal. It's specific, it's measurable. He thought it was attainable, and everyone did. It was relevant, and he put a time frame on it. We'll put a man on the moon within this decade and return him safely to Earth. Versus if you had said, we want to have the highest quality space exploration industry in the world. That's a very different kind of goal than the second one. So it's a good way to think of the goal setting. And then that's second. So number one, we've talked about expectancy theory. Number two, we talked about equity theory. And number three, we talked about goal setting. Now, in this one, I want to talk about something else. But before I get into that, I'm going to ask you to think about job satisfaction. In using one word, just each of you type one or two things that brings you job satisfaction. Is it pay, promotion, other people, you know, whatever it is? What are one or two things that bring you job satisfaction? Just type it into chat and put it up there for us to see. Recognition, responsibilities, promotion. No pay. Meaningful recognition. All right. Now, in your list, probably there's about 15 or 16 different adjectives that people have come up with. If I took your list that you put, and your mention of recognition probably is sometimes people put that under promotion. But what happened is on the list, it's been boiled down to these five have probably turned out to be the top five leading to job satisfaction. And I'm going to put a poll up there for you. These five: the pay, promotion, supervisor, coworkers, or the work itself you do. I'm going to put up there a poll I have. And I want you to ask, can you see the poll?
Yes.
What do you think gives the highest satisfaction from a job? You could pick two there. So just pick two, and then we'll end it when everyone has answered. So how many of us are here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everyone answer? There's 8 of us. All right, so let's end the poll and share results. So pay would end up number 1, promotion, work itself, boss, and coworkers. Remember, all 5 have turned up. Well, here's what's from the research. And these are from all the research on job satisfaction. All 5 of these have a high correlation with job satisfaction. But the strongest is are the green. And in the green, this one of work itself is a 0.6. That's an extremely high correlation, but 0.7 is an extremely high correlation. So number 1 on the list is the work itself that you do. And kind of coming in number 2 to that is your coworker or your supervision. Basically, a couple things there are with our bosses, we really want 2 things from a boss. We want them to make sure I have the resources so I can get my job done. And we want to like them. And then from our coworkers, we want basically 2 things: to know that the other person has my back and we like them. I mean, these were 2 of the characteristics that turned up. And then next is promotion at 0.4 is still a very high correlation, and 0.2 is pay. Pay is an interesting one. As you look at pay, I'm not going to get into it a lot tonight, but this work itself that you do is interesting. And the work, there's been a lot of studies done on the work itself that you do. And these all come under this notion of empowerment, psychological empowerment. And a lot of the job that you do pays into this. So a feeling of empowerment is a major motivator. And basically, feeling empowered has to do with the meaningfulness of the work you do, how much self-determination is there, do I feel competent, self-efficacy, and does what I do have an impact on others? This kind of all leads to a real state of well-being or a state of feeling empowered. So that's the next area to think about when you think about motivation, psychological empowerment. And so it has to do then a little bit with this feeling of empowerment has to do with the work itself you do. So that survey I gave you, I emailed to you today, that survey relates directly to this chart I have up here. And that survey, I'm asking you to look at how satisfied are you with the work itself that you do. And if you look at that survey, you see VISA, those questions relate to those blue. How much variety is in your work? How much do you identify with the work? How much identity is in the work? And how significant is the work? That all feeds into how meaningful is the work you're doing. Like the work that you do, does it really matter? Is it significant to the organization? Then autonomy has to do with how responsible are you for the outcomes you see? can you directly see your hand? Do you directly impact the outcomes? And then knowledge of the results. That all leads to a sense of satisfaction. Now, all of this assumes that you have the knowledge and the skill to do your job. And all of this assumes that you have a desire to grow, that you want to grow. There's a lot of people out there who don't want to grow on a job, who just want to go and exist. So this green are, basic assumptions. If you're a person with a lot of knowledge and skill and you have a need to really grow and develop, then this model would fit for you. So that survey I asked you to do, I think if you scored 150 or less on that, you might want to take at your job. All the years I've been doing that job satisfaction survey, people have felt that it's been pretty accurate. And one of these elements could be at work if you're finding yourself dissatisfied. Whoops. And we did that. And then finally, I think your textbook has this model. It's an integrative model. And on this integrative model are all four of those types of motivation that I talked about. It starts with you going to put the effort out, how intense. Do you have goals that you are accepted and challenging? Do you have the ability to do the goals? Do you feel the outcomes are fair? That they're things that you need? And that leads to satisfaction, which in turn goes back to effort. And then, whoops, I hit the wrong button. And your book talks about a 6-step model for motivation, and I've made that available to you. If you are feeling demotivated, I can pretty much guarantee where your motivation is coming off track is in one of these areas. So establish moderately difficult goals that are acceptable. Remove personal and organizational obstacles to performance. I could put employee in there for student, or you could put yourself in there for student. Do I understand? Do I feel it's possible? So you could substitute any word you want for student. Use rewards and discipline appropriately. This is expectancy, and I've labeled the theories on this. This is right from the textbook, these six areas. Provide internal and external incentives. Distribute rewards equitably, and provide timely rewards and specific, accurate, honest feedback. So that in a nutshell is motivation. And I highlight that that 6-point, I think it's in the that 6-point plan. That's what the whole chapter on motivation flows around. But what I've tried to do is label for you some of the theories that tie in there. And think about each of these. I really think this is a pretty important area to think of for yourself. I know some of you are questioning jobs you might be in and your satisfaction. I got that from your papers. Take a look at this whole area. Identify where it's coming off track for you. Any thoughts on motivation before I quickly end with a little discussion on happiness? Any questions or any thoughts? let me end with a real quick few minutes on this topic of happiness. And I call it, whoops. What do we know about happy people? And I'm just going to quickly run through these. Some of the traits of happy people, extroversion, but what this might mean is that extroverted people seem to have a lot of close relationships or a lot of relationships with people. So we're not sure exactly what that trait means. Self-esteem is strongly correlated with happiness. A sense of personal control, or do I feel like I'm in control? Hardiness, we talked about the health, optimism, and low neuroticism. That people who can name several intimate friends with whom they share their intimate concerns freely are healthier, less likely to die prematurely, and happier than people who have few or no such friends. If the goal of a society is to raise enjoyment of its citizens, we should devise ways to increase our social relationships and our networks. So that's a biggie. 3 out of 4 married people say their spouse is their best friend. So throughout the Western world, married people of both sexes report more happiness than those never married, divorced, or separated. Of course, the traffic could be two-way. Happy people might be more appealing as potential marriage partners. Doing versus having. Money spent on doing things tends to provide more enduring happiness than money spent on having things. Experiences tend to produce more enduring satisfaction than do possessions. A lot of this is because one of the problems with purchasing things, it causes people to compare themselves with each other. And sometimes when we compare, we set up barriers. We're looking to get more social connection rather than set up barriers with each other. 4 studies in 2010 found that waiting for experiences also tends to be more positive than waiting for things. Think about going on vacation or a holiday coming up. Waiting for an experience tends to be more pleasurable and exciting than waiting to receive a material good. And then the flow of happy people. When work is a pleasure, life is a joy. When work is a duty, life is slavery. For many people, work provides personal identity. It helps define who we are. It provides supportive relationships. And it can add a sense of focus and purpose to one's life. Sometimes work isn't satisfying, and it can be overwhelmed when challenges exceed our time and skills, or we can be underwhelmed when challenges do not engage us. When challenges match skills, we enter an optimal state that, boy, I can't pronounce this guy's name, this psychologist, but he calls flow. And we talk about being in the flow. And the flow of happy people is to be unself-consciously absorbed. One gets so caught up in an activity that the mind does not wander. One becomes oblivious to surroundings and time flies. His studies discovered that happiness comes not from mindless passivity, but from engagement in mindful challenge. Whether at work or at leisure, people enjoy themselves more when absorbed in the flow of an activity than when doing nothing meaningful. So in summary on happiness, think about developing in our relationships. Think about being committed to what we're doing. Think about social support and networks, and think about being in the flow or operating mindfully with whatever we do. So just some thoughts on happiness. I didn't get time to, if I get time in the next couple of days, I wanted to cover a couple thoughts on mindfulness, and I still might do it for you. Put a little 20-minute description in on mindfulness, kind of being in the present, trying to get in the flow. You know, a lot of this course has been about preparing and developing skills and you as a leader. But a lot of this has to do with your well-being, and you taking care of your well-being is an important part of being a leader. So I hope we've helped you on your way, at least a little bit in this course. I'm a big believer in what you've studied here is very important. And sorry about that. So I mean, I hope you've come away with one step on the way to leadership, a little bit of helping you with your well-being, etc. So with that, that's all I have for you. Your papers are due at the a week from Friday is when I turn the grades in. So at being graduate students, though, I can work with you beyond the due date to complete the course. I hate to tell all the procrastinators this, but if you need more time, we can even work beyond when I turn the final grades in. You have a whole other semester to complete the work. So what usually happens if you don't turn all your papers in or your final papers and you need more time, what I do is what I can do as an instructor, I can turn an incomplete grade in and then go back and change it. So but I tell all of you that if you need more time, it's not a problem. I've been pretty flexible about that this semester. So as I said, if you need time or have trouble getting all the papers done, just let me know. I'm more interested in you taking the time and do them correctly rather than doing them for me to get them done. So anyone have any thoughts or questions before we kind of wrap up?
Thank you for your patience and your flexibility. That's Sheila speaking.
You're
I
welcome,
appreciate
Sheila.
it.
You're
You're
welcome. As I said, I'd rather you get something out of this and rather than rush to do things just for me. All right, everyone. Have a good rest of the semester. I look forward to reading your papers. You had me busy in Florida last week, reading all those other papers. Now, you got my notes back on them, don't you?
Yes.
Whenever I make a comment, it lets you know.
Yeah.
I don't
I
see that end of it from my end. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you, and I'll make this video available. So